Glorama Haggett, Diawit Armadan, Thomas Lilly, is Adam Dam, is Merakanakme, Agus Mishaer, Agus Yenu is Shanakime, Ishamakri Meher. That will conclude the Irish language portion of our presentation today. I didn't notice anybody nodding along, so I don't think there are any native Irish speakers here, and I'll be honest, I'm not a native Irish speaker either. I took a few lessons along the way. But when Dr. Dastadar told me over the summer that the eradication of indigenous languages is a common feature of colonization around the world, I thought that a few words of the still extant Irish language to start us off here would not be a bad idea. So my topic is the Belfast Agreement of 1998. I am probably the only person who you will hear refer to the Belfast Agreement by the name the Belfast Agreement. And that is because in a bit of brinksmanship by the negotiators, the agreement was agreed to on the Christian holy day of Good Friday, 2 days before Easter in 1998, and so the agreement became known popularly as the Good Friday Agreement, and that's the name most people use to refer to it. But it's a little like, do you say the William Tell Overture or do you say the Lone Ranger song? It's two names for the same thing. One's the formal name, one's the popular name. So whether we call it the Belfast Agreement, the formal name, or whether we call it the Good Friday Agreement, the popular name, I would like to start by putting the agreement into historical context for you. I'm going to assume that most people here have not read a lot of Irish history, and so I'm going to try to summarize for you about 800 years of Anglo-Irish relations in about 8 minutes. So fasten your seatbelt. Here I go. The first English invasion of Ireland came in the 12th century, and it came at the request of the Pope at the time, who was the first English Pope. And the justification for the invasion was to bring the Irish people into closer conformity with the Roman Catholic Church. So the first English invasion of Ireland had a religious justification, and that's a pattern that we see continued over the ensuing centuries. There followed miscellaneous invasions by various English warlords, none of which had a particularly deleterious effect on the Irish people until things got more serious and more systematic in the 16th century. Henry VIII, who I assume everyone's heard of, was the first English king that also proclaimed himself to be King of Ireland as well, although in fact he only controlled a fortified area around Dublin. His daughter, Elizabeth, when she became queen, she went to war with the most powerful Irish chieftains of the time. They were in the northern part of the country, and as she defeated these northern chieftains, she undertook a policy called plantation, meaning that as she defeated her enemies, she took their lands and she gave them to Scottish colonists called planters. And these planters were of a different religion than the indigenous population. The indigenous population was Catholic. The planters were Protestant. And these tracts of land they were given were called plantations, and they would be clustered together around garrisons. So starting in Elizabethan times, back in the 1600s, we have a group of people living in the northern part of Ireland who consider themselves ethnically separate from the indigenous population and who have a different religion from the indigenous population. The next great event in Anglo-Irish relations in 1649, we have the Cromwellian Conquest of Ireland by Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector of the English Commonwealth. When Oliver Cromwell became Lord Protector of the English Commonwealth, he perceived that he had powerful enemies who would seek for support and for a staging area in Ireland. In addition, Oliver Cromwell was a religious zealot and a militarist, and so he saw the conquest of Ireland as a way both to secure his flank and to take arms against Roman Catholicism. Exact numbers are difficult to calculate, but a reasonable estimate seems to be that Ireland lost 40% of its population as a result of the Cromwellian Conquest, lost either to death or sold into slavery and transported to the New World. Following on the Cromwellian Conquest was the imposition of the Irish penal laws, which, as the name says, were laws passed by the British Parliament to punish the Irish people. They made it illegal to celebrate Catholic religious rituals. Catholic clergy were subject to arrest and execution. Catholics could not own land or be educated or belong to a profession or own a horse. And Catholics, although not Protestants living in Ireland, were subject to an annual 10% tax, which was used for the upkeep of the Protestant clergy living in Ireland. The penal laws were gradually repealed over the years, but the combined effect of the Cromwellian Conquest and the penal laws was that by the time we get to the middle of the 19th century, there are two classes of people living in Ireland. The indigenous population making up approximately 85% of the total population, and those people are generally Catholic, non-landowning, and living in poverty. And then a smaller population, about 15% of the total, known as the Protestant ascendancy, capital P, capital A, and that's the group of people who are responsible for administering British rule on the island of Ireland. The indigenous population survived by working as tenant farmers for absentee landlords living in Britain. The way the tenant farmer system worked was that the tenant was given a small plot of land on which he could grow crops for his own sustenance. In that part of the world, if you have to get as many calories as possible from a small plot of ground, you grow potatoes. That gives the most calories per square foot. In 1845, a blight wiped out the potato crops across Europe. This resulted in mass starvation only in Ireland because of this tenant farmer system. Ireland actually was still growing plenty of food. Exports of food actually increased during this so-called famine period, but that was all food that was for profit of the landlord, that was kept under armed guard. The indigenous population didn't have access to it, so the indigenous population died in great numbers. This time, a reasonable estimate would be that the island lost 30% of its total population, lost either to death or emigration. That obviously had a devastating effect on the Irish people and their culture. The Irish language almost went into extinction. And the culture did not really start to recover until the early 20th century, when Irish politicians tried to negotiate for some form of local autonomy for Ireland. And that was known as Home Rule. And for a while, it looked like the Irish politicians might be successful, that they might get a Home Rule bill passed in the British Parliament, until it met vigorous opposition from the descendants of those Scottish planters living in the northern part of the island. And they objected so strenuously, they said that if a Home Rule bill was passed, they would launch an armed insurrection, and they started raising money and buying guns to give substance to that threat. And as an interesting side note here, one of the supporters of that movement in England, who helped them buy guns, raise money and buy guns, was a fellow named Rudyard Kipling, you may have heard of. We can give this group of people living in the north, who are the descendants of these Scottish planters, we can give them a political label at this point. They are unionists. That is, they want to maintain a union between Britain and Ireland. In light of the unionist objection, Home Rule did not pass. Instead, there was a rebellion by Irish nationalists. There's nothing unusual about that. There had been rebellions by Irish nationalists pretty much every generation going back to Elizabethan times. But this rebellion was above average painful for the British because it started in 1916 during World War I. So in 1921, a war-weary Britain offered a deal to end the rebellion. And the deal offered Ireland a form of home rule, but it came with two catches that the Irish nationalists found difficult to accept. One was that when the Irish nationalists launched their rebellion, they said they were fighting for a republic, which at a minimum would mean no kings, no queens, no hereditary aristocrats. The English deal on offer would create something called the Irish Free State, which would have local autonomy, but all members of the government, all members of the legislature would be required to swear an oath of fealty to the British monarch. So that was something difficult for these Irish nationalists to accept, and we can at this point give them a political label. They are Republicans. They have dedicated themselves to a Republic of Ireland. The other aspect of the deal that was difficult to accept, and the reason why this presentation fits in here today, was partition. The British proposal was to partition off the northeast corner of the island. A border was drawn around an area designed so that there would be a solid majority of Unionists living in that newly created entity. And that newly created entity would be called Northern Ireland, capital N, capital I. That deal, with those two catches to it, was put to a vote in the Irish legislature, and it passed. It passed by a very narrow majority, but it passed. A large number of Irish Republicans found that unacceptable, and they took up arms in opposition to it. They were not successful in their armed opposition to that deal. Neither, however, did they ever surrender. And rather, what happened was Ireland and Britain fell into a pattern where these Irish Republicans would rebel, the British would react and suppress the rebellion. There would be a period of simmering discontent, and then the rebellion would relaunch. And as each time we went through this cycle, the two groups, the two political groups living on the island, the Unionists and the Republicans, would get more and more hostile to each other, more and more segregated from each other. So the Belfast Agreement attempts to address this situation and try to end that cycle of rebellion and reaction. I should mention that of the two issues that were separating the two sides, one went away not with a bang but a whimper. That is the part about Ireland being a free state with an oath of fealty to the British monarch. In the 1940s, the Irish legislature just declared it was no longer a free state, it was now a republic, and the British accepted that as a fait accompli. But the partition issue continues through to today. So what do the different interest groups get from the Belfast Agreement? From the British point of view, including the Unionists, who consider themselves British, the main thing they get is a pledge from the Republicans to stop shooting at them and to stop blowing things up. The Belfast Agreement contains a commitment that the entity of Northern Ireland will not be integrated into the Irish Republic unless and until the people of Northern Ireland agree by a separate vote. And that this can be accomplished only by peaceful means. And the chief negotiator for the Republicans for the agreement rather dramatically announced, this means the era of physical force republicanism is over. To give substance to that, an international commission was created to certify that the Irish Republican Army had decommissioned all its arms. And that happened over a period of several years following the agreement in stages. And I think it was in 2007, the International Commission said, yes, we now certify the Irish Republican Army's weapons have been put beyond use. So that seems like a big thing for the British to have achieved. What did the Republicans get in return? Probably the biggest thing that the Republicans got in return was reform of the government of Northern Ireland. Republicans said, because this is a gerrymandered entity created so that there will always be a unionist majority, and because it's a winner-take-all system, we have no meaningful participation in this government. We have no way to politically rebel. We can only militarily rebel. Well, the reformed government has a power-sharing structure, and the way that works in Northern Ireland is all the parties are categorized as either unionist parties or nationalist parties, and if, as has always happened, the unionist parties collectively get the most votes in an election, then they name the first minister of the government of Northern Ireland. And if, as has always happened, the nationalist parties get the second most votes, they name the deputy first minister of Northern Ireland. And then the other ministries of government are parceled out in like fashion, so that we now have Irish Republicans in the government of Northern Ireland. So that's a significant change from the Republican point of view. That's a significant accomplishment. Another significant accomplishment from the Republican point of view is the reform of the police force in Northern Ireland. Me, living on this beautiful island that we live on, if I have a problem that requires a police response, I call the police, and I expect them to respond. I expect them to protect and serve. But if you were a Republican living in Northern Ireland in 1998, that would not be your view of the police. The police, then known as the Royal Ulster Constabulary, your view of them would be that they are there to maintain British rule and suppress nationalism. On a good day, the police are there to harass you. On a bad day, they're there to shoot, arrest, or kill you. You would not call the police if you had a problem. You'd have to call someone else. And certainly, if you were an Irish Republican, you would not join the police. That would be seen as something that was shameful to you and would bring shame on your family if you were to work for the police force or work for what was then the Royal Ulster Constabulary. So the Belfast Agreement created a commission to reform the police force, to turn it into more of a protect and serve kind of police force that we would recognize here in America. And that didn't happen overnight, but over a series of several years, the Royal Ulster Constabulary was reformed into the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And in 2007, that reached a sufficient point that Republican leaders said, we now can call this our police force as well. When we have a problem, we can call the police. You don't have to call us anymore, you can call the police. It's now an honorable profession, if you were a Republican living in Northern Ireland, to join the police force. So we now have Irish Republicans in the police service of Northern Ireland, something that would have been unimaginable when I was a boy. And then one last thing I'll mention that the agreement did was it created cross-border bodies. That is, bodies with representatives from the Republic of Ireland and representatives from Northern Ireland who work together on common issues of concern like the environment or agriculture or tourism. The Unionists had opposed the creation of cross-border bodies as a form of integration by degrees, and Republicans had wanted cross-border bodies for exactly the same reason. And those bodies now exist and are, in fact, operating in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And now I've been talking too long, so I'll sit down and shut up. Thank you.
Is Mr. Mr. Rashimi Cole here? Okay. Mr. Would you kindly, thank you.